What's going on, everyone? My name is Kareem Merchant. I'm an industrial designer and I am the product content manager here at KeyShot. Today, we're going to be jumping into KeyShot and we're going to be looking at some general workflow overviews. Again, hopefully, we have a little bit for everyone from beginner to intermediate. Maybe some advanced users are going to learn something from it as well. So that would be great. We'll talk about CAD importation, bringing your models in. We'll talk about how to prep your models for material application before you get into KeyShot, as well as in KeyShot. Take a look at some of our drag and drop asset libraries, how to customize those materials, and then we'll get into lighting and cameras for your final output. So it should be good. I'm going to be pretty quick about this. We'll jump in a second here. I did want to plug our YouTube channel. So if you're interested in anything we're talking about here, or you have other things you'd like to explore, we have a really rich YouTube channel with all kinds of content. Highly recommend checking that out. It's a very useful tool. So with that said, let's jump into KeyShot and let's start seeing what we can put together. So right now, I have this model here, and basically what I wanted to start talking about is CAD importation. So there's essentially two ways to import your CAD into KeyShot, direct imports and plugins. So if you're going to direct import your CAD into KeyShot, there's a couple different ways you can do that. It's all the same tool. We have our import tool down here on the toolbar at the bottom. You can find that same tool through the file menu or hit Control-I. And the way I typically do it is I just find my file through the browser and I drag and drop it into the scene. So typically when you're opening KeyShot up, you're going to end up with a blank environment just like this, and you can drag and drop your CAD data into the scene here. You'll get an import window, and then you'll have settings that you can adjust. You can add material or CAD data into an existing scene, and that's where you do that from here. So right now, I just have this model up here. The other way you can approach importing CAD data is through plugins. If you go on our website, we actually have a long list of plugins we have for different CAD programs, ones that we've created, third-party plugins that we support as well. And the really nice part about working with plugins is that if you are kind of in an iterative process where you're still working in CAD, but you've started outputting renders in KeyShot, you can push any updates you might do to KeyShot without having to restart a new scene, reapply materials. As you make those adjustments inside of your CAD software, you're linked to KeyShot and you can just send them over. You'll maintain that same scene that you were working on and not have to worry about starting all over again. So two ways that you can import your CAD data directly into KeyShot. Definitely go check out the plugins. It's a very useful tool. And the next thing I wanted to talk about is prepping your models prior to bringing them into KeyShot for material application. Now, there's a lot you can do in KeyShot to prep your models as well, but it's always good to be working from the start and kind of thinking about where your end result is going to be. And there's two ways that you can do that as well. Right now, you're seeing this color blocked model that I have on the screen. So if you're in your CAD software, I'm a SolidWorks user, I can apply appearance colors to my CAD. And then when I import those appearance colors and the CAD into KeyShot, I'll get something that looks like this. And basically what I would do is I would find whatever objects that are going to share the same materials. I'd apply the same color to that. So when it comes in, I've basically told KeyShot that those colors are going to be linked. So if you bring in CAD that hasn't been prepped, you're going to get something like this clay model that I have on screen now. And all the bodies are still separated. If we look over here in the scene tree on the right, you can see all the different bodies that we have. But when I try to apply a material, it applies it to everything because KeyShot is reading this single color as every material being linked. So you're gonna have to split those materials out. And I'll show you how to do that in a second here. But if we go to our color blocked model, when I try to apply a material to a specific color, you can see that whatever color codes that KeyShot is reading are the same. They're all receiving that exact same material and they're already linked. I don't need to go through that process. So it's a very useful way of working and just kind of jumping in and saving yourself a little bit of time. Now, if you are a KeyShot user, you maybe have a product catalog that you're using similar materials over an extended period of time, or you have somebody updating those materials based off of trends or whatever you're following. We do have a tool called the material template tool. So if I have CAD data and I know that I'm going to have certain materials applied, I can create a material template. I'll just go ahead and create one real quick. You can add different parts and materials manually if you want specific ones to come over. In this case, I'm just going to use automatic and hit material. We'll create that template. And then if I go to my template rules, you can see here that we have source materials on this side and then new materials over here. So this is where you're going to find your KeyShot materials once you've applied them. And basically I can just use a rules-based system where I'm saying, number 213, whenever I bring it in from my CAD software, 213 is always going to be amazing grape color. I can locate that 213, pull and drag and drop my material directly onto there. And then basically this new material column will update showing that the 213 material correlates with amazing grape. And that way, when you're importing your models using a material template, you're going to end up with a level of base materials already applied to your model, and then you don't have to go through the process of actually applying them. At that point, it's just customizing your materials, dealing with your lighting, dealing with your cameras, and then your final output. So even faster than working with color blocking, a little bit more of an advanced tool, but it's super useful, especially if you're using similar materials over and over. It just simplifies the entire process. But that's two ways we can color block and import CAD data so that it's already prepped and we don't need to worry too much about prepping our models in KeyShot. That said, you can also prep your models in KeyShot to make things a little bit easier. And we'll get into the scene tree in a second here when it comes to doing that. So to show you what I'm talking about, we'll jump over to our clay model again. So as I showed you, our clay model, when I try to apply material, everything receives that same material. We don't want that because tires are not supposed to be painted. They're supposed to be rubber. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go in here and we're going to split this model apart. And so the first step that I always do if I'm bringing a model like this is I just locate the parent model. If you look in the scene tree over here on the right, if I collapse that, you can see that this is that piece of CAD that I brought in and all the bodies associated with it. You can either just select that parent line, or you can go down and shift select everything that's in your scene tree if you want to be super safe. Right click, go to material and hit unlink. And then now with the unlinked material, you can see that when I try to apply a material in my scene, it's only applying to things that are the same light item in my scene tree that came in from CAD as single bodies rather than being fully linked together. Now, obviously, things are completely unlinked. My wheel hubs are not receiving the same material when I try to apply it. So the next step is actually linking those materials. And there's a couple of ways you can go about linking materials. One, you can just select the materials or the CAD data, locate it inside of your scene tree, and then right click once those are selected. And when you right click, you're going to do the opposite of unlinking. You're going to open the material and you're just going to hit link. And then now when I actually apply that material, you'll notice that it is attached to both of those wheel wells. So that's one way to go about linking materials. I'm going to go ahead and Control Z that. And another way to do that is when I apply a material to a single part, and I know that another part is going to have that material, I go to apply it to that part, we're going to get a little window that pops up here that says link duplicate materials. So if you do want them linked, you can go ahead and hit yes, and you'll notice that both of those materials are now linked. And then the last way that we can link materials is if we actually have a material already applied, we can double click that object. It'll open it inside of our project panel. And just a side note, there's essentially two panels that you work with inside of KeyShot. One is the project panel. This is where you're going to find all of your parameters, settings. You'll be able to adjust everything from cameras, materials to lighting. And then the library panel over here on the left, which is where I've been pulling that amazing grape color from. This is where you're going to find all our internal assets, the default assets that KeyShot has, as well as any assets that you import in. Right now we're in the materials tab, but you have color libraries and all kinds of other libraries we'll get into here in a second. So the way I would link with the material open, you can see here in the top right corner, there is a little thumbnail showing a preview of that material. If I actually grab that thumbnail, I can apply materials directly from the thumbnail, and you'll notice no window pops up. KeyShot automatically knows that if I'm using that material to apply it to different places, it's going to link those materials together. And then when I go in to make an adjustment to the materials, which I'll zoom in here real quick, you'll notice that those materials all update together, and we can see that happening on both of the wheel hubs right now when I add flakes and I add roughness. So it's a really useful way of working to make sure all your materials are linked from the start, but you can do it in KeyShot. To go one step further, I'm actually going to apply a different material here just so it's a little easier to see what we're working with. Sometimes you are importing your CAD data. Ideally, again, coming from CAD, your CAD data is really, really strong. All your bodies that you're going to want to split off or add materials to or animate in the future have all been CAD modeled separately as individual bodies. But sometimes, like the case of this model, a few parts that I might want to apply materials to are not separated. So if I click on this screen over here, I'd like to isolate that screen, but you'll notice that the entire body's selected. If I zoom in here on the hubs, you'll notice that the actual lugs themselves are part of the hub itself. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use a tool to split those off. If I right click my body that I have selected here, we have two tools. We have split separate objects and split object surfaces. So split object surfaces essentially lets you just pull a face off of your object rather than splitting the entirety of that object. That's useful if you want to apply a specific material to one side, maybe, and not the other, or you're dealing with logos or some sort of graphic that you don't want to wrap around a radius or something like that. That's a very useful tool. But in this case, we're going to use the split separate objects. And you'll notice when I open this window, we have that body. And when I select the body, it's isolating the body and it's recognizing that there's other components here that are actually separate bodies. In this case, we want to split this screen in the front, so I'll select that. We've isolated the screen. I'll hit split object, and then I will apply that split. And now when I select it in the scene, you'll notice that it is independently highlighted there, and we actually have a separate line item for it. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is scene organization. And again, going back to CAD, it's good to have all your data in CAD squared away before you bring it in, rather than just having a bunch of things called, body one, body two, then you don't really know what you're looking at. And when you start splitting objects inside of KeyShot, you end up with these line items that basically have adopted the naming convention of the parent object it was split from. In this case, screen. It's a little difficult to find what the screen is to guess which one it is. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rename this screen so that when I want to search for it later, if I go to the search field here at the top and I type in screen, we can easily locate it and isolate it inside of the scene tree. It's very useful. And we're going to continue this process right here with the lugs as well, because we want to apply a different material to those lugs. So I'll click on that wheel hub, right click, split separate objects. And then in this case, I'm going to hold down control and I'm going to multi-select all my lugs because I want them to be split out as a single part. So I'll split my object, I'll apply, I'll come over here to the other one. We'll go through the exact same process, split separate objects, control select, so I can multi-select all my lugs, split object, and then apply that as well. And then you can see when I select these, inside of the scene tree, we now have two separate line items for those. And if I hover over, you get a little preview of the actual CAD that is now split apart. And then going back to kind of keeping your scene tree sterile and nice and taken care of, we'll rename these. I'll rename that top one left front lugs and the rear one left rear lugs. All right. So that way now when I search lugs inside of the search bar, we can find those pretty easily. And in this case, because we split it from a parent object, it's maintained that linked material. I want to apply a different material. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to unlink these, same way we did for the entirety of the model. And then I will go ahead and link those back. So now they're connected and they're separated from the hub. That way I can find a different material. Maybe we'll go with a brass polished for these and I'll apply that there. And you'll notice that it's now being applied separately, but the two sets of lugs are accepting that material together. And one more thing about organizing and splitting. If I look here in my scene tree and I have these both selected, you'll notice that they're actually under different parent materials. They're separated. And if I go to my full scene tree here, you're going to see that there's even more going on here. I want to group those together just to make it very easy to find. So if I have them selected, I right click and I go to group selection. I'll get this change scene hierarchy window that pops up. And I just want to be clear that like early in the process, this is the time to do this, because if you're changing your scene hierarchy later in your scene when you've already started building out, let's say animations or things that are dependent on that hierarchy, there's a high chance that you're going to break something. And if you break something, then you have to work twice. And that's just not a good way to work. It's exhausting and it's frustrating. So I like to do this early in the process and really think about where I'm moving towards and how I'm going to get there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. We'll go ahead and look in the scene tree here. And you can see that there's now a group with those lugs underneath that group. So I'll rename that group left lugs, easy to find. And we are good to go. Now, kind of mentioning the animation side of things. Right now, I've split these off as individual objects where all the lugs are combined as one object because I was applying materials. But let's say I wanted to animate it. In this case, with the way I've split things off, I really only have two options. I can either, if I'm doing an exploded view, I can either blow out each of these sets of lugs together, or I can animate the top level by using the add animation or going to my animation toolbar, and I can blow them out together as the two groups combined. But let's say I wanted to actually have each lug come out individually on each of the wheels. I'd have to go back in there. I'll go back to my split separate objects. And then in this case, instead of multi-selecting, I'm going to split each individual object out on its own. And you can see all these line items being created over here on the left. And then when I apply that, I go into my search and I type in lugs. You'll notice that we have a bunch of different lugs that have been created here, 0 through 3. And the reason why I did this, and it kind of worked from the top level to the more granular, is because now I don't have to rename all those. I've already renamed the lugs over here left front. So when I split those objects, because it pulls that information from its parent object, it's now taking on the naming convention of left front lugs and giving me a numerical value. So it's just an easy way to set up your scene for success when you're actually applying materials. So we learned a little bit about how to prep the model. That's kind of the basics and everything you need to know to really get started and have an easy workflow once you're into KeyShot. But we're going to jump back over to our color blocked model, and we're actually going to talk about materials and applying those materials and customizing them now. So you've seen me pulling materials over here on the left in the library panel. We have lots of default assets. As I mentioned, this is our material library. We also have colors. You have tons of different color libraries you can use from Pantone and Coloro and others as well. We have textures, a bunch of built-in textures if you need those for any reason, if you want to drive effects on your surfaces or use it for 3D paint. Environments as well. We have our HDRI environments, and right now I'm actually in our default environment. I tend to work in 3 panels tilted 4K, which you can find right here. And aside from that, you can also import all kinds of different assets. You can import your HDRIs or materials. We have backplates for backgrounds. If you need a quick background, you can save your favorites so you can easily access them. And then we also have some native geometry in KeyShot. You can ignore the Lamborghini, the lawnmower, and the radio here. Those are things I've imported. But all this blue CAD data, it's really useful because you can use it as backdrops. You can build podiums. You can use it to mask lights. I've even built rooms using them so that I could do interiors. So it's very useful to have these on hand and just be able to kind of scale them and apply materials as well. But let's jump back over to materials since that's what we're talking about. We have a pretty extensive library of different materials, everything from liquids and metals, paints and plastics. If you want to search for a specific material, you can find that folder down here, locate the folder as I did with metals or paint, scroll through those specifically. So in this case, I'm going to go back to my metals and I'm going to apply metals to my wheel hubs and my lugs. So we'll go scroll down. I'll probably use the exact same ones I did a second ago. Maybe we'll go up here and grab a blue or something. Yeah, let's use blue for our hub, for our lugs this time. So I've applied those. If I want to go in and find a paint for my side of the vehicle here, maybe I want a black paint so I can search for it, make my life a little easier rather than scrolling through everything. And I can also do that for tire material. So instead of going through and trying to find tire material and all these, you can always go to the top level of your materials and just type in whatever you're looking for, and it'll pop up in the library over here. So I'm going to apply my tire material and then maybe add a couple more materials here and we'll call it good to go. I'll use a blue for that blue area, and why not? We'll use a red down here. We'll make it pop. So at this point, we have kind of applied some default materials. Let's say I'm ready to go and I want to actually apply some textures to here and I want to start customizing the material. I'm going to switch back to my other lighting environment so we get some nice reflections going on here and we can really see the texture. And we'll open up this material in the material tab. I'll double click it and you can see this is exactly where we pulled that thumbnail preview and linked materials earlier. So here you're going to find a variety of different parameters that apply to whatever material you applied. These change based off of the material type. And you can see as I make adjustments, our texture is being adjusted and our surface is being adjusted as well. I can change the refractive index. But we also have a couple other tabs here. We have our textures, which we're going to do in a second and look at that. And we have labels as well. So if you're trying to apply labeling or graphics, if you want to change the materials of that labeling, make it look embossed or debossed, you can just drag and drop PNGs into here or whatever image file, and then you make those adjustments from here. But we're going to go into textures, and I'm going to show you how to customize this surface. So we'll go over to our textures tab in the library panel, and I'll scroll through here and find something that I want to use. Maybe let's see what we can find. Maybe we'll use this diamond plate pattern. Throw that on our bump, and you can see immediately our surface has changed and it's receiving that diamond plate pattern. I'll reduce that scale so it's a little easier to see. And you'll notice that it looks like a three-dimensional effect. We're not actually altering any CAD geometry inside of KeyShot. Right now, this is just an optical illusion, essentially. KeyShot is reading this image texture from black to white color values, and it's calculating depth based off of that. And then we're getting this three-dimensional effect on our surface. And we have this little parameter called bump, and we can adjust how apparent that is. Right now, it's kind of embossed look. It's protruding from the surface because we're in positive numbers. You can see as I go towards 0, it becomes more and more faint. And then once I go into the negatives, it starts looking like a indentation in the surface. It's like a debossed effect. So you can really have a lot of flexibility with your textures, and that applies to your labels as well if you're trying to create effect like this. Now I'm going to go ahead and open the material tab real quick. The material graph, excuse me. If I open the material graph, a lot of people tend to get a little intimidated by the material graph. I think it's an incredibly useful tool, and once you've played around with it a couple times, it's pretty easy to understand. You'll notice that I have my paint here. This is essentially the anatomy of the material I have applied on this side. This is the base material, this is the material type, and this is the bump we've applied. And if we go over to our textures, you can see that the bump that's here is also in this little slot right there. Now, we also have the same exact adjustment parameters as we do in the material tab inside here, so everything will be exactly the same. In this case, I'm actually going to delete that diamond, and we're going to try to create an orange peel texture the way you might see on like an automotive paint, since this is kind of an automotive model-ish. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right-click on my material graph, and you'll notice that we have all these different nodes that we can use within KeyShot's material graph, including materials and textures. We're going to go to textures right now. We'll jump in a couple other ones in a second. But right here, we have a bunch of procedural textures. So you don't need to worry about tiling. Everything is going to be seamless, and you can create some interesting effects with these by adjusting things. We'll start really, really simple, and we'll just use a noise texture to create this orange peel effect. I have my noise texture. I'll apply that to the bump, and you'll notice that the surface changed. And if I double click that and I open my textures, you'll now see that this texture is also in the bump slot inside of my material tab. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this because we want it to look more realistic. If I click on that texture node and I hit C, we're going to get something called a color preview. And that's essentially the image texture overlaid over the surface of the model. So I'm no longer seeing the effect it's creating, I'm just seeing the image. And when I'm adjusting my textures, I tend to work with the color preview on just to make it easy rather than having to guess what it looks like based on the effect on the surface. Like as you use it more, it'll become fairly easy to guess what's happening, but I still prefer to use the color preview. In this case, it's a pretty basic material. There's not a lot going on. I'm just going to scale it down so that it's a little bit more subtle. I'll hit C again to get out of my color preview. You can see the scale looks nice, but it's still a pretty aggressive bump. So we'll go into our bump height and we will adjust that bump height down closer to 0. And you can see it kind of disappearing. If this was an actual automotive paint that I was doing, I'd be very subtle about the orange peel. Hopefully, if it is a good paint job, you won't have too much orange peel. But in this case, I'll probably leave a little bit visible just so you guys can see it on your screen. And the nice part about the material graph versus just working in the material tab is you can actually stack textures. So right now, if you look in the material tab, we only have one slot for a bump. And we look over here in the paint, there's only one slot for a bump here as well. But in real life, when you're talking about injection molded parts or, even things that are fairly pristine like watches or something, manufacturing marks make things imperfect, handling and usage, you have a lot of imperfections, and your mind might not entirely take in all those imperfections just from you looking at it, but your brain is processing all that in the background. And that's kind of what helps make things photorealistic. Even if you don't quite see it and register it visually, your brain is still registering it. So we can create custom materials and stack effects to create a little bit more photorealism. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select this line that's connecting the two nodes, and I'm going to right click that line. And right now, basically what we've done is we've drilled down to only the nodes that apply to this specific connection point. I don't see all the nodes we had over here. So I'm going to go ahead and click that line again. I'll hit utilities, and we have something called a bump add node. And when I click on that bump add node, you'll notice that we have a second bump input here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create like a scratches effect on this surface. Let me zoom in a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to go right click on the material tab. I'm going to get into my textures and I'm going to find my scratches. I'll attach that scratches texture to my bump 2, and you'll see that we now have a new effect on the surface. Not quite scratches that I'm going for, more like uniformed machine gouges, but we'll change that in a second here. So if I go into my scratches texture, I can see all my different parameters to adjust. I'm going to go ahead and hit C to go into my color preview, and I'll start by scaling this up a little bit so that the scratches are a little larger. And we also have all these settings for density, size, and thinness. We can change the noise levels. I'm going to start by adding some noise to my texture, and you can see almost immediately we're getting a lot more organic scratches. They don't look so machined and uniform. Things are starting to look a little bit more realistic. Maybe I'll even increase the scale just a tad bit, and we'll increase the density so there's more scratches. I can also adjust the thinness to try to make them a little bit more faint and look like something that's a really fine line scratch. And then I also have the ability to add different levels of my noise scale. So in this case, everything kind of looks similar sized. Maybe I want to have more noise in the background, and I want to increase my levels of that noise and then the scale difference between them so we have a nice variety. So when I hit C again, we can see what that looks like on the surface. Still not the faint scratches I'm looking for. I haven't adjusted the bump height, but you can see that this looks entirely different from the original procedural texture that we applied to the model. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to change the bump height. And again, we're going to make this very, very subtle. If this was a realistic rendering that I was trying to do and stay with something that's pretty photoreal, I'd almost go to 0 where it's just completely not noticeable. Maybe something like that, where if I zoom out, there's just a little bit of fracturing of that reflection line, and you're not really noticing it at a distance, but your brain is pulling that data in. But if I zoom in, you can see that a little bit more clearly if I increase the bump height as to what's going on the surface. So as of now, as I mentioned, when we're dealing with bump, we're not actually changing the geometry of our model at all, but you can actually change the geometry of our model. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete the scratches and this bump add node, and we will zoom into our primary node. You have something called geometry. So I'm going to recreate that texture I made, the orange peel texture, but this time I'm going to actually affect the geometry of the model. So in here, we have a set of geometry nodes. You can create bubbles inside of like a liquid. You can add flakes to a surface. You can add fuzz over that surface as well, but we're going to use displace to displace this texture. So I'll go ahead and I'll take that same noise texture, I'll apply it to displace, and then I'll apply my displacement node over to geometry. And you'll notice nothing happened, and that's because we need to calculate the geometry. So I'm going to open up my displacement node, the settings for it, and then I'm going to hit execute geometry. And we're going to get a really crazy effect here because I haven't dialed in the height. So you can see this texture is like aggressively displaced all over the surface of this model. Now we want to dial that back and we want to get what we want, but we're going to have to update our geometry node each time we do that, since KeyShot has to recalculate how that geometry is changing. So we'll go in here and we'll add a couple zeros and see what happens. Execute geometry, and we should get closer to what we're aiming for. Yeah, okay, so now we're not quite there, but we're pretty close. I'll add another 0 in there and see what happens. Make it a little bit smaller. And there we go. We're pretty much exactly where we were on the last orange peel texture. Again, the difference is now we've actually created a geometry change to the node. So when we're looking at this geometry node, we can 3D print this surface entirely. If you're outputting from KeyShot and you have different models that you want to prototype and do all kinds of like maybe iterative models, ergonomic models. You can actually use 3MF. We have 3MF, which allows you to print in full color if you have a 3MF printer, like a J55 or something. So you can test out your logos and test out all kinds of different things. If you want to actually just print out and see what textures look like, you can do that as well. So the reason why I brought this up specifically is that when I look inside of our textures over here, we have something for knurling. So knurling can sometimes be a little difficult to actually CAD model, or it's time consuming. But in this case, you could use the knurling to drive your displacement. You could create a bunch of parts that have different knurling depths and different scale. And when you actually displace those, print those using OBJ or something to your FDM printer or resin printer, and wake up the next morning and actually be able to feel what that knurling feels like. And then from there, use that to inform your CAD. So it's a really useful tool. Not just rendering, you can actually use it in the iterative design process and kind of go back and forth between things. So with that said, we've learned a little bit about materials. We're going to jump into lighting our scene here in a second. Let's jump over there real quick. So we'll go to this prepared model I have, and we'll pretend that we've applied all these materials. We're ready to go. This looks good. We want to start setting up our lighting, and we want to get to the final render as quickly as possible from here. So there's essentially two types of lighting in KeyShot. There's HDRIs, which we've briefly looked at. You've seen me jump between the one I like to work with and our default library that gives our three panels tilted from our default library that gives us a little bit more contrast. And we also have something called physical lights. I'll stick with HDRIs for the moment. So aside from our large HDRI library, we also have the ability to import HDRIs, and you can even create custom HDRIs. So if I come over here, I can create a blank HDRI environment. If I go into my HDRI editor, I can add lighting pins, and you can see that when I move that lighting pin around my environment, I light up my scene in different ways. Now, we also have this great little tool down here that lets me set highlight on a specific part. So rather than guessing by moving that pin around in space, I can literally just click on the surface of my model, and wherever I click, KeyShot will orient that pin so that it's creating a highlight in that specific point. I have controls over brightness. I can change the radius if I want a larger light spill. And if you're trying to go for like a stylized effect, we can even change the lights. You can do, cinematic lighting, or if there's like an LED in the room, you can recreate that. So it's a really flexible tool. And HDRIs versus physical lights, HDRIs tend to be a lot faster to calculate, and they don't require as much compute power. So if I come back to my three-panel tilted, you can also adjust existing HDRIs, whether that's imported ones or ones you're using from the default library. So I can come here, I can rotate it and maybe find a spot that I like the highlights and shadows on my model, but I'm looking here and I'd like the front face of my model to be a bit more lit up. So I can actually add another light pin to that HDRI, hit that, use my little set highlight tool, throw that on the face of the model, and I can adjust it as needed. So just some quick ways to light your scene. Again, a little bit more contrast goes a long way to making things look photorealistic. The next thing I want to talk about is our physical lights. So physical lights, they're accurate to real world lighting. They do require a little bit more computation power, but I'll show you in another scene real quick, kind of what that looks like. So here, this scene is lit by a single physical light. We have a spotlight, and you'll notice that there's a lot of liquid, there's a lot of fluted glass, there's caustics flying everywhere. You can kind of see that on the left side here and the light passing through the liquid. When you use physical lights, it's a lot easier to make that stuff look realistic. And aside from that, if we get a top view, one of the differences between HDRIs and physical lights is the realism of shadow cast. So an HDRI is kind of a flatter environment, and when we're using HDRIs to light things, things look more uniform. In this case, this is very realistic to an actual light source. The farther to the edges of that light source you go, the wider those shadows get casted off to the sides, the angle increases. And that happens when you're using physical lights. It doesn't happen as much when you're using HDRIs. So that little extra bit of realism is, again, going to trick the brain when you're looking at those images to feel like it's an actual image, a photograph, like a product photograph, rather than a rendering inside of KeyShot. So I'll jump back over to our scene that we were working in, and I will show you how to apply those physical lights. So right here in our edit menu at the top, we have something called Add Light. And here's where you're going to find your physical lights. We have a few different options. Planar lights and area lights, you can think of them like LED light panels. Planar lights kind of have barn doors so you can control the direction of the light. IES lights are great for interior lighting. They're accurate to interior lighting. We have a bunch of built-in default IES materials and lighting options. So if you're an interior designer, it's a great way to work. Point light is essentially a little sun that spits off light in 360 degrees, and spotlight is exactly what it sounds like. It is a directional light from a single light source. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply our planar light. And if we zoom out here, you can kind of see that light being cast on the ground plane. I'm going to scale that up for you so you can see that a little bit better. And then we'll see what that total light panel looks like. You can see the light being cast over it. And then these are the barn doors I was talking about. As you adjust them, our light becomes more directional. And if I'm completely closed, you essentially see a box around it. Now I'm going to open up that light inside of our material tab. And you'll notice that those same adjustment parameters are here underneath my material tab. I can just pull the sliders and it'll have the same effects. Right now they're linked. If I unlink them, I can start creating unique panels or changing the width in a single direction. I can work on one set of barn doors versus the other. And, maybe in this case, I'll create a beam of light. I'm going to change the power here because it's a little light, but you can use lumens, wattage, or lux, whatever you feel like you want to use. In this case, I'm probably going to use about 8,000 lumens. Yeah, okay. And then if I sit here and I take these barn doors in, we can see that that light becomes a little bit more directional and we get a nice little beam of light covering our model. And almost immediately when I zoom in here, you'll notice that this is starting to look a lot more photorealistic. There's more contrast, there's more richness in the details. We have a nice highlight going over the top here, especially in like automotive lighting, so you can show off the curves of the body of the vehicle. But this is already looking significantly more photorealistic than it did just a second ago. And I typically don't work only with physical lights. I tend to do a mixture of both, just the way you saw me do it here. So I'll start with an HDRI lighting environment. That'll be my base lighting, and then I'll probably add one or two physical lights just to bump up the photorealism just a tad bit. And it keeps the whole scene pretty light and easy to work with and doesn't bog anything down. So at this point, we're going to call it good on the lighting, and we're going to start creating some cameras. And you may have noticed that I'm just wandering around this scene willy-nilly. So when you open up KeyShot, your default camera here is going to be a free camera. I have a camera added because that was the hero shot that we started with, but you're only going to have a free camera there when you're working in KeyShot, and you'll build your cameras from this point. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a camera. I'm going to create a detail shot of this logo right here on the front. And this is I think a good location for us to look at that logo, but you'll notice that everything is in focus. This doesn't look very realistic. It doesn't have the same qualities as a product photograph, but we can change that with this depth of field tool that we have here. And so when I click on depth of field, you're going to notice everything gets blown out. Typical camera lens has some f-stop. It has compression depending on how far you are away, and you're going to get some level of fall off on the edges. Right now, we don't have a focus point set where we want it, so I'm going to hit this set focus point target button. Works the same way as the highlight tool on your HDRI. And you'll notice now that the logo is in view and it's nice and clear. There's a lot of fall off, so I'm going to adjust the f-stop up so that we can bring a little bit more into focus. Maybe I'll do 4.5 on that one. And now we have a nice detail shot of our logo. We're losing a lot of the data on the sides here. Our eye is being pulled into the center, and we don't need to worry about what's going on the sides. So it looks a lot more like a product photograph. Again, we're replicating how things would actually look like in the real world. So I like that. I'm going to create a new camera, and I'm going to name that camera detail so that we know that is the detail shot. And then I'm going to actually lock that camera. So once it's created, we have a little lock icon here. I'll lock that camera. I can now no longer move that camera around. I can't change parameters. I'm not going to accidentally mess something up. So I'll go back to free camera and I'm going to create another view. I'm going to scroll out here and we'll create a side view of this delivery bot. So you'll notice here that my depth of field is still clicked on. I have the f-stop still set to 4.5, but a lot more of the scene is in focus, and that is because we're farther away from the actual object. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to adjust that f-stop down because we do want to have some depth of field around the edges here. And you'll notice that I have not set my focal point. So if I set my focal point on the panel, that comes into focus, and the rest of the scene is out of focus. So maybe I'll do 0.5 on that one. And we have a nice amount of fall off on the edges of this image. Again, it's starting to look more photorealistic because it's replicating how a camera would actually look. So I like that. I'm going to save that in a second, but I wanted to talk about this little keep focus toggle I have on. I recommend you keep that keep focus toggle on at all times, because if you shut it off and then you start wandering around your scene, it's like instant drunk goggles. You're not going to be able to see anything, and that is not helpful for selecting parts. So if you have that keep focus on and you have your focus point set, now when I zoom out and I move around my model, everything stays in focus. It maintains that focus point, and I don't need to worry about it. I can still select everything I need. So at that point, I think I am ready to save this camera. I'll go ahead and create a camera. I'll call this side view, and then I will lock that camera as well. And at this point, I am ready to make my renders happen. So I could queue up all these different camera angles and have them rendered out one after another. I could select one and then render that out individually. If I go to my render window here, we'll open up all of our settings for rendering. From here, you can change the naming conventions and the number of your render when it's output. You can choose the location it's going to be sent to. If you don't want it in the default library and archive, you have access to all kinds of different formats. If you're post-processing in Photoshop or other softwares, TIFFs and PNGs, presets for your resolution. You can do custom resolutions. And I also want to talk about this little layers and passes section right here. So layers and passes, I typically only use Clown Pass. It's just basically a 2D output that's color blocked for my different parts. So when I'm editing or post-processing, I can just use a quick selection tool, overlay that, and I don't have to sit there and try to feather edges and get them perfectly. It just lets me work very quickly. But you might want to separate out your lighting or your reflections, or you either don't know which ones you want or need, or you want all of them. You can just hit all render passes. And at that point, once you've kind of set up all your settings and you're ready to go, you can go to render your actual image out. We have a couple different ways you can do that. If you hit this little drop down, we have local rendering. So basically that overtakes KeyShot entirely, and you'll be putting all your compute power to rendering. You can render in the background. KeyShot will render in the background while you're still able to use KeyShot, but that power will be split, so things will be slower. If you have access to network rendering and you have a network, you can send it off to your network. Your computer's completely freed up. Once it's done rendering on your network, it'll get deposited into the location the file path that you've selected. And then lastly, we've introduced cloud rendering, similar to network rendering, except you're using our servers to render. If you select cloud rendering based on your settings here, just above these buttons, you'll get a count of how many credits you have available, as well as how many credits this is going to cost. You just hit that button, you fire it off to our servers, and then sit back and wait for your render to show up inside of the file location. And at that point, you are ready to go, and you're just waiting to see what those final images look like. So with that said, I think I've covered quite a bit. Hopefully, if there's questions, and I'm sure there are, we can answer some of those in the Q&A section. If you want to dive in deeper into all of this, again, we have our YouTube channel, lots of great content. You can find specific things we've talked about here and kind of get a little bit more granular on those as well. So go check that out. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause this and jump over to our PowerPoint one last time. And I wanted to plug our upcoming webinar on September 10th. So we have this Academy KeyShot and Rhino webinar. We're going to be talking about using Grasshopper for complex geometry and how to iterate design patterns using Grasshopper as well. We'll get back into KeyShot. We'll talk about applying materials and adjusting them, set up our scenes, and we'll also talk about consuming your design updates from Rhino into KeyShot. So basically what I was talking about with the plugins, we'll get a better look at that specifically in Rhino. So if you're interested in that, there's a QR code down here on the right, and I do have a couple more QR codes for you on the next slide. So if you're interested in a 14-day free trial, you want to get into KeyShot and you're not a KeyShot user, you want to tool around and see what you can do and how it works for you, give that left QR code a scan and it'll take you to the download for that 14-day free trial. Highly recommend that if you're not already playing around in KeyShot. And I also recommend you scan that right QR code, That'll put you in touch with our sales team if you are interested in using KeyShot. Chip is our solutions engineer. The man is a master at KeyShot, so he'll give you a pretty big breakdown of what we went through today, go into a bunch of things that you may have seen that I didn't even talk about. And the best part is you get some one-on-one time with him so you can ask questions related to your specific pipeline or how it could benefit your company as well. So if you're interested in booking a demo and getting that one-on-one time and asking those questions with Chip and the sales team, give that right QR code a scan and it'll take you to the demo request form, and then you guys can get set up there. But again, hopefully this was all pretty helpful and I was able to answer some questions for you guys and kind of give you guys a look into the entire process. But we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A. Hopefully we have some time here still to do that. And I'll just kind of go back to KeyShot while we do that. Do we have any questions? I'm sure we do.
We do. There's a lot in the chat, but I'll go over to the to the Q&A. Um, oh my, they keep going in. Could you talk a little more about translucent materials and how their size affects the way they look?
Yeah, okay. I can't really show it on this because this model's prepped, but basically, if you are working with translucent materials or transparent materials, scale is going to affect how your light passes through. You can make adjustments to your transparency distance so that it is a little bit more transparent and light passes through better. If you're working with those materials, increasing the sample count for that material will greatly help you deal with caustics and light passing through. So there's ways to go around it if your scale isn't proper. But again, like working from CAD, the best and most sanitary option is to try to keep all your scale correct. And that way you have realistic effects. But the biggest things is just make sure those sample counts are a little bit higher. It will help with caustics and light passing through, and play with the transparency distance a bit so that you can kind of achieve the look that you're going for.
Another question from Chris. What did you say that if we do to the model or the environment, it would break live linking? And what can we do to
Ah,
prevent that?
I wasn't talking about live linking specifically. I was talking about anything that requires scene hierarchy. So if you're talking about animations, if you're switching things up at the end there or breaking parts after you've already created something that requires scene hierarchy, you're probably going to break those animations. At that point, you can either reverse your choice, or you can go in there and adjust your animations. You probably don't need to start from scratch, but if you go into the animation toolbar here at the bottom, you'll have a bunch of different line items for your animations. You might have to reorganize things a little bit and adjust some parameters there, but that's how you would deal with animations specifically.
Let's see. How can we achieve double-walled items accurately? Is it an issue that needs to be addressed from the model, making the model actually have thickness?
Correct. Yeah. If you want to have an accurate look at like a double walled item, you should CAD model it. You can, I I mean, if it's a solid material, you probably won't really notice it too much. But if you're trying to create like a transparent material, or if it's like a double walled glass, that's where you're going to start noticing things. And if you really want it to look accurately, then you have to CAD model it in.
There are a couple questions about like the AI shots feature. Somebody asking, can you try a background with the AI shots feature? I'm wondering, Kareem, if we have, and I can track down the link, like a video up on YouTube or somewhere that kind of
Yeah.
walks
Yeah, we
through
do. We
this.
we have a couple YouTubes up on, or a couple videos up on YouTube, and actually the background image here, I will pull up the presentation here again for a second so that you can see it. Oh, come on. All right, so that image was created in AI shots as well. That was a fairly low resolution shot, but it really depends on your software or your hardware, what GPU you're running, how much VRAM you have. So I have this laptop that I'm working off of right now where I'm running a 3080. It has less than 16 gigs of VRAM. So, those images were done at a lower resolution, but I also have a A6000, we're like, I believe it's 48 gigs of VRAM, so I can crank out 4K images very quickly without issues, which I wouldn't be able to do with this laptop here. But AI Shots is down here in the corner. We essentially have three different modes. I tend to not use Imagine mode because that's essentially like a prompt-based image generator that just gives you images, but we have the ability to create backgrounds or restyle where you can actually change colorways or add details to your model as well. I would check out that those videos up on our YouTube channel because it shows the entire process of outputting and prompting and showing the different settings and all the different tabs that you have access to inside of AI shots.
Let's see. Do you have any recommendations for setting up preset scenes and materials to improve workflows?
Yeah, again, the material template that we were talking about, being able to set up, the information from your CAD source, whatever the naming convention is that you're bringing it in, and then being able to apply those materials as a correlating material in KeyShot. That's incredibly easy. Um, you can also set up templates for your scene, not so much for materials, but like you can create an environment that's already staged with your lighting, and that way when you bring in your model, you still have to materialize it. But really, the two ways to prep from CAD and make sure that things are as easy and quick as possible are to either color block or to use those material templates. The material templates are awesome if you have the time. And it really, unless you have somebody updating your templates, like, let's say whatever products that you're putting out are really dependent on trends or specific colorways being released each year, that would require somebody to actively be updating your material templates. But if you're a company that's kind of generally using the same materials, it's really easy. You have that material template and then you can always apply it. Or if there's a set of materials that you regularly use, no matter what, whether it's for screws or tires or whatever it is, you can take out half of your battle just by setting those up as a material template as well. And then having like body components that might be subject to trends or color reports or whatever it is that you're basing your decisions off of.
One question from Brian. How are studios intended to be used in this workflow?
So in this case, I'm using model sets. You can set up different studios if you have different variations of lighting that you might want to use, different environments that you want to use as well. I tend to use model sets more than anything since I'm not working with a variety of lighting options and I'm trying to output a single image. But if you were using studios, you're just essentially creating different studios, different parameter sets, different lighting, maybe different image settings. I didn't really get into the image tab here on the right, but you do have some level of adjustment. I've just been using basic, but you can also go into photographic. And then if you're familiar with like Lightroom and stuff, you have all kinds of adjustments you can make here to really dial in your image. So maybe you have stylized images versus not, and you can create your whole setup of studio so you can just jump between them very, very easily.
Is there a way to avoid labels from shifting or moving when scaling models?
When you're scaling models, you're probably going to have to scale your labels again. It's been a while since I've actually done that. So let's see what we can do real quick. If I can apply a label real quick here. Let's go into our materials, our labels, and we'll just drag and drop a old KeyShot label on here and see what we can do. So we have it here, and let's say I'm adjusting the scale on my model. You'll probably have to come in here and you can sync. That'll help a little bit, but you're still going to have to scale and move things around. Again, like this kind of comes back to thinking things through from the start, and where you're trying to get to. Like I would probably add my labels near the end of the process once I've already got my scale down, I've got my materials applied, and I'm kind of getting ready to actually do my renderings. That way I can save myself a lot of that hassle.
There's a question about being able to composite displacement, and can we do that yet?
I do not believe we can do that currently, but I can double check on that answer for you and we can kind of fish that down a little bit. It would be very nice to be able to composite displacements.
Hmm. Oh My goodness, there are so many. We have about 3 minutes left, so we'll just do a couple more questions. Okay, from Carson, how to shrink the color pop-up box? No handles to shrink an OK button off your screen. I think the
Ooh,
question is how to shrink that
like
color.
the color picker, I'm going to assume
I
here.
think
So
so, yeah.
yeah, if I go over to, I'll just kind of go over to this model right here real quick, since I don't have anything UV. In that case, I had a UV map texture on there, so it makes my life a little bit easier. But let's open up the color picker window real quick. So you're saying, this is kind of off to the sides and you can't really see it. So basically, you just kind of grab a corner of your window and then you can pull it in there. There's no handle that's popping up. Sometimes it doesn't pop up, but as long as you grab the edge, you can resize it. And if it's off to the side, just, you can pull it into the actual screen itself. It could be that your program window is slightly overlapped on another monitor, or maybe you opened it up in the other monitor, or the last time you saved your scene, your color picker was off to the side. So you can just bring it back on your screen and again grab those edges and just size it to whatever you need. You can also actually dock the color picker window into different places if you need to.
There are a lot of questions about lighting, but I'm going to pick one and see if maybe it will cover a couple of people's questions. I usually work with lights that simulate LEDs, and even though some of the materials are translucent, the light doesn't seem to pass through them. Could you explain why that happens and how I can improve the effect?
So I'm assuming that you're probably using an emissive material to try to recreate that LED. And the thing is that an emissive material is kind of an effect on the surface that you're applying it to. It's not actually producing light out and lighting your scene. So typically, the way I do that, if I'm trying to create both an emissive to generate an LED, but I want light cast, is I'll pair that emissive with like a spotlight or something casting onto the area I'd like it to come out of. And then I just hide that light and I match the light color to the emissive. So it's kind of a mixing of actual physical lighting along with the emissives as well.
I'm going to put a link in the chat, but I did want to mention we have a community forum that is a great place to put your question if we didn't get to it today. We're just about
Definitely.
right at time. So there's lots of internal experts like Kareem on there. Our developers are in there. Our product team is in there, looking at your feedback and answering questions, but also external KeyShot experts. So a lot of customers, some who I see on this webinar today, who are in there answering questions as well. So feel free to put them in there. I just put a link. You can use your KeyShot account to sign up, but the forum is there and it's a great resource, certainly. But I think we are right at time, so apologies if we did not get to your question, but thank you for all the great questions.
Appreciate you all being here.
Thanks everyone. This was recorded, so if you've registered, we will get that recording to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Mara.
Thanks
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.